One of our project members, Clayton Spada, had been teaching in China, and he goes there regularly every summer and teaches workshops. He and his students were working with the idea of doing camera obscura images, and they were making what by most standards would be pretty large photographs, camera obscura photographs, room size or trailer size pictures. And upon his return, we have a legacy meeting. We try to have one every month to deal with whatever business that we need to deal with and upcoming events. And at one of those meetings, I think Clayton brought up the idea of seeing if we could turn one of the buildings out at the base into a camera and make a really large picture. And we started looking into which ones it could be. Finally settled on building 115, but it was Clayton who initially came up with the idea. And the group, having maybe had a couple beers during the meeting, said, okay, fine, let's go for it. And after a year of planning and organizing and putting things together and soliciting donors and contributors, we finally made the thing happen in July of last year. Basically, a camera obscura, in simple form, is a box with either a hole in one side or a lens in one side, and light comes in that hole or through that lens and projects an image on the other end of the box that is projected, as all lens-formed images or aperture-formed images are, upside down and left to right reversed. And if you put light-sensitive material there and can control opening and closing the lens or the aperture, you can create a photograph. And what we did was turn a former F-18 jet repair hangar into an immense box camera or camera obscura. Now, I don't remember the exact dimensions of the building. 45 feet high, as I recall, was the ceiling. We didn't have a lens. Our aperture ended up being 6 millimeters, or around 1/4 of an inch. And the distance from that aperture to our focal plane, where the piece was where our muslin was hung, was 55 feet. The cloth that we used was really based on what we could fit in the building and have room to move around the sides and comfortably work in the building and do the things that we would need to do to prepare the building. There needed to be adequate room behind the cloth so that we could also move. But in order to seal the building and make it light tight, we had a 40-foot lift in there that had to drive around inside the hangar. And so we needed plenty of room around our cloth and plenty of room in back. And so it just worked out that we put the cloth about 55 feet from where the aperture was going to be. The cloth is muslin, which is like canvas. If you touch it and feel it, it feels like a canvas that one might paint on. We had to order it from Germany because there wasn't any place in the United States that made one that big that was seamless, and we wanted a seamless piece of cloth. The cloth that we originally got, I think, was 35 feet by 120 feet, and it ended up being trimmed somewhat to fit in there and also to create other fairly large pieces of fabric that we could use as test strips to test our exposure. The cloth cost I think $3,000 or something like that. That money came from things that we did to raise money, like selling the special edition prints and other. A lot of the costs for producing the project came from sponsors that helped us with either direct financial donation or in-kind donation, or helping us with services and that kind of thing. Freestyle provides photographic supplies, and they supplied us with the liquid light, the light-sensitive material that coated the canvas. The image size is around 31.5 feet by 107.5 feet at this point. What's funny is it actually was larger than that. And when we processed it, we had to bring it down from its hanging position into an immense photographic darkroom tray that we had made. Once we got into the building and started looking, there were an awful lot of holes in the building. It was a camera with a lot of light leaks, and it took 2.5 or 3 weeks to plug up enough of the holes to make it dark enough and light tight enough that we didn't feel that the picture was going to get fogged upon exposure. One of our sponsors donated the use of the lift for us, which would be a huge expense, and also in the initial stages donated crew to run the lift. United Rentals is the one that supplied the lift. Then they left the lift there for us, and we used the lift for the rest of the 2.5, 3 weeks to go around and climb around inside the building to seam up these holes. And the most obsessive one of the group for doing that was Jerry. He just delighted in being up on that lift and stretching tape and plastic and climbing around up in the upper reaches of the building. Eventually, after 2.5 weeks, we got the thing pretty well sealed, and we had cranked the front doors open about 1.5 feet on the hangar doors, and then filled that gap with plywood top to bottom. And in the center of that, we placed a plate that would eventually have the aperture in it. The aperture was located 15 feet up off of the ground to project this image back on the cloth that, as we said, was 55 feet away. It pretty much projected the image to be centered, or close to centered, on the cloth. The cloth was already up and in place. It was pretty much fixed. It wasn't going to be moving around at all. It was it was framed in a steel batten that ran all the way around it to stretch it and keep it taut, and it was anchored both to the ceiling and to the side walls and to the floor. We had a master rigger come out and design how to do that. His name is Tony Long, and he was terrific. Without Tony, the thing would not have been properly in place and properly done. And he was one of the ones that spent major time in the lifts and kind of almost like a surveyor, got the right points on the floor, matched those to the right points in the rafters to secure things, put together all the rope and pulley systems that were used to raise and lower the thing. And he came up with the design that the rigging around the edge of it needed to be. And we really depended on his expertise and his advice to put the thing together. It takes a lot of people to lift the thing and haul it down, but it takes one person, and that's Tony, to make sure that it's done properly and that it worked. Since there's no lens, there isn't any focus. It's focused only by using a small aperture, which gives you incredible depth of field. And in this case, I can't remember what it would work out to in terms of f-stop, but the aperture was 6 millimeters and the focal length 55 feet. So if you do the math on that, I think you come up with f/2200 something. This is the first time that the canvas or the muslin was lifted into place. This picture, as I recall, was taken by Jacques Garnier, and I think it's a terrific photograph that shows not only the scale of the object, but how many people it takes to get it up and down within the building. And of course, it was not light sensitive at this time. It was just in the rigging, and we were lifting it in place for the first time to see what it was going to look like and how it was going to be in there. And we had, for various phases of this project, we had many, many volunteers, students and people from the community and other photographers come out and lend us a hand. And again, like Tony being important to the rigging, we never could have made this happen without all the people that came and participated in it. Over 100 people volunteered various times to come out and help. Well, that's a picture that I took inside the building with the muslin in place, and the person that you kind of see there is Jerry Birchfield. He's standing on a ladder, and this is in safe light conditions inside the building. We had safe lights running off generators inside the hangar so that we could see to walk around. At this point, there is not light sensitive material on the big canvas, but the other things that, I don't know how well you can see them, but the other things that you can see hanging there are test strips that we made. And so those things are coated with light sensitive material, and we hung them up via tape and safety pins on the larger canvas to do test exposures to see what our exposure time was going to be. Because nobody had ever done anything on a scale like this before, they really didn't know, and we had been advised that our exposure time may be in the length of days. 6 to 8 days is what we originally expected, and it turned out to be 35 minutes. This is a fairly long time exposure, again, inside the building. This time the building is light tight, and this is the image projected by the aperture onto the muslin. If you stood in the building for maybe 30 to 40 minutes, your eyes would acclimate to the dark, and you could actually see this image projected onto the canvas. And if someone, for instance, happened to drive around out here on the tarmac, you could see the cars go by. And we built a baffle that limited the image eventually to the perimeter of the cloth, but when we first had it, before the baffle was there, it made this immense circular image, so you could see things move off of the thing onto the roof, and it was pretty fun to have guests in sometimes and be looking at that thing and see the activity that went on. A very wonderful, joyful, unique time in an artist's life to be able to be involved in a collaborative project like that. I think is probably a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, this whole legacy project thing. It is just fabulous to have the camaraderie with other people involved in the industry. And I talk to a lot of people in the arts, and I hear stories about, oh, this person is this way and this person is this way. In my life in photography, I have met the most wonderful, nice, kind people in general. It's like photographers are the best group of people you could ever want to encounter. This is a picture that Jerry took from the outside of the building looking in on the night that we processed the image. And what you see trailing in there is a fire hose, which is one of two that we used to wash the image inside the hangar after the chemicals had been applied and removed from the surface. So when the image came down after exposure, we exposed it from 11:30 in the morning to 12:05, 35-minute exposure, and then it hung in place until that evening when many volunteers arrived, and we had in place 600 gallons of developer and 1,200 gallons of fixer all ready to go in barrels to be pumped onto this thing. The initial process was 600 gallons of developer pumped out of individual 30-gallon trash barrels that we had. We had swimming pool pumps in the bottom of each of those barrels. So initially, developer was pumped on. That took about 5 minutes of developer in contact with the surface. And then those pumps were immediately pulled out of the barrels that had developer and put into barrels that had fixer. We pumped 600 gallons of fixer in on top of the developer, and then that whole slosh was pumped out of the tray on the other side and recovered because it all had to be hauled off-site. And then an additional 600 gallons of fixer were pumped in all by itself to complete the fixing process. That was then removed, and then there were two fire hoses that came in from either side of the building and washed down the print. And what you're seeing there in the picture actually does convey the feeling of the place that night. It was like an inferno inside there. It was incredibly hot, very steamy. And pretty remarkable sight to behold. We finished the exposure around noon, and I think we finished the processing, and we were kind of being ushered off the base by the police at midnight that night. We barely made it when they were going to close the gates. The total processing to get all the volunteers there, get them all organized, get them into teams, get the thing going, get the thing done, took about 4 hours. The emulsion is applied by hand. It's a substance called liquid light that a lot of people may have used or tried, experimented with as photographers. It's something generally that you would probably use a little paintbrush and paint onto a piece of paper or whatever surface that you wanted to make light sensitive. But this is 3,000 square feet, and so what we did was we had 7 teams of 3 to 4 people each. This is the finished image, so you can see what it ultimately looked like on the muslin. We lined up in parallel and went down the length of the muslin side by side, hand applying with paint. It's not a brush and it's not a roller, it's like big paint pads, hand applying the liquid light. It took about an hour, 45 minutes, 2 hours to get down the length of the canvas and get it covered with the light sensitive material. When the thing was processed, we really didn't know what it was going to look like visually, and because of that hand application, it came out with this kind of painterly look to it. You could see many of the brush strokes, obviously here where the liquid light was applied, but also it does reveal this wonderful detail of the buildings and little details of the seams in the contract and manhole covers in the tarmac. The subject actually is the control tower building on the base, and we chose this particular building because it looks straight into, or faces straight on to, what will be the center of the Orange County Great Park. And then it also includes the control tower building and what was probably the most significant center of operations when the place was a Marine Corps air station. The control tower is still there. The trees are gone around it, and I always thought that those were some of the wonderful elements of the photograph. There were these 2 giant palm trees, one over here off to the side and one in front of the building. They've cut those down, but the building is still there, and that may be one of the very few buildings that ends up being saved and will stay when it's a park. The hangar is still there. Lennar, who is the company, the developer that bought the property, is using that building right now to store furniture. We can drive around it. We no longer can get inside of it. The filler that we made in the hangar doors is still there, the plywood pieces that we put, because the doors won't move anymore. This is the positive negative version of the piece that we made. It's the bottom half that's representative of what we did. We made a giant black and white negative. The positive was made from a digital composite of several pictures that were taken of the negative. The last photograph was done the day after, or a couple days after we finished the processing, and we had a special little reception in the hangar, and this is the building that was used to make the photograph. That's the giant camera obscura, and you see it photographed by another photographer friend of ours, Tom Lamb, who came over that day in a helicopter, and all of us came out from inside the building and gathered in front to be photographed in front of the giant camera obscura. We had a little reception inside for all the people that had helped us put this thing together, and that's all of us out there in front of the building. These are special edition invites to the exhibition that starts on September 6th in Pasadena at the Wind Tunnel South Campus of Art Center College of Design. We take on doing things in a rather unique way. We have 2 kinds of invites. One is a postcard invite that we probably sent out 4,000 or 5,000 of, and several thousand were sent out by one of our sponsors, Freestyle. Then Doug McCullough, one of our project members, designed this nicer one, and designed it with the idea of having a special keepsake invite that could go out in the mail and would also, to some extent, be available the night of the opening reception. So there were 3,000 of these made, each of them signed. They're all numbered and each signed by all 6 of us. The look of the image, I think, echoes a lot of photographs that you may see from the 19th century. And I'm not trying to be pretentious when I say this, but in terms of the visual look of it, to me it reminds me of that 1827 image of Niepce looking out the window. It's kind of soft and fuzzy. It does record, though, remarkable detail of the scene. It does not look exactly like photographs that you see commonly today, either chemically processed or digital images. It's not smooth tone, continuous tone looking. And then of course it's a negative that we made, and I think a lot of people expect to see a positive. And one of the things that we hope comes from this image is not just the fact that it's the biggest photograph ever done, but the fact that it can kind of look backwards into the history of photography, and I think the look certainly suggests that, but also punctuate what's going on in photography now and somewhat the transition from chemical processing being the main way that photographs are made into a digital domain where more and more things are going to be handled that way. Certainly the chemical part of it isn't going to go away ever, we would hope. But in terms of making contemporary images, it will become less and less significant. So this picture also looks forward, with the positive versions that were all done digitally, to that future. And it also looks, in terms of the subject matter of the picture, at the past, being the Marine base and the control tower part of that, and also into the center runway areas of the base that will become the future Orange County Great Park. So the picture itself looks both directions.